Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Q&A. A few of you asked whether I had a cold last week or whether I am indeed Ed Miliband. The answer to both those questions is no, my mic is just being kind of weird. But thanks for asking and glad to see that a few of you British guys out there have been involved with the political season, I suppose. I did want to open up today's Q&A before we move into the questions themselves with something about my gameplay and specifically what you guys have been seeing on screen. Number one, a lot of people have been asking how I've been getting rid of the minimap. A lot of people have been asking how I get rid of the like black bars around the sides of the screen, how I get rid of the haze and fuzz that appears on the screen when you get put in combat, all that stuff. That is done by immersive combat mode. There'll be a link to it, or at least a video that I did, in the description down below, and you can actually run this thing without actually doing any of the gameplay changes, just the UI stuff, and it's really awesome. That's basically what you're seeing there. That's why a lot of my footage lately has been looking a little bit cleaner. And also, I wanted to at last give you guys an update on the status of my GemFX setup. Truth is, I haven't been running GemFX for about as long as I've been running combat mode. GemFX was really cool, and I really liked the preset I'd made. The truth is about that GemFX preset, though, is a lot of it was just SweetfxSettings. What GemFX really is it's just a few shaders and options built on top of the SweetfxSettings infrastructure, and the GemFX stuff I wanted was like the lens flares and some of the lighting things, which ultimately looked smeary and weird on YouTube, and I culled off and culled off and culled off until they were barely noticeable anymore. Then when it came to the idea of bringing combat mode back for the UI cleaning, that was kind of the nail in the coffin for GemFX, as the two are not compatible. If you want to run both together, you can only do that with SweetfxSettings and combat mode, not GemFX and combat mode. So a couple of weeks back I changed that, and so when a lot of you guys have been saying, hey, your game looks awesome, what are your GemFX settings, it's now SweetfxSettings, and I will post on a paste bin my SweetfxSettings settings in the description if you guys would like, as even though I don't think they're perfect, I'm still not tweaking them too much anymore. For what it's worth, the SweetfxSettings I'm using is given to me by a friend who says they got it as a preset like a long time ago, so I'm sure it's very similar to one of the presets already out there on the database. I just don't know which one. And then it's got my little changes on there too. So that's pretty much all of that. That's what's going on with the footage. Let's get into the questions. The very first one's from Elizabeth Ann. I went in oldest comments first, so those of you who got your questions in very early, you're the ones who are getting them answered here. Elizabeth said, what is your opinion on what we should do with our skill points in Guild Wars 2? Should we go ahead and get our Mystic Forge stuff for our legendaries right now, like Bloodstone Shards that cost 200 skill points, or do we hold off and get the T5 or T6 mats when skill points phase out? First of all, a clarification. You don't directly get T6 or T5 mats from this new currency they're adding. Let's call them Ginguts, as that's what they called them jokingly on the live stream. This currency won't get you like T5 or T6 directly. I mean, it can if you then use that currency to upgrade T4 or lower tier stuff up, as you currently can, but not directly. It's basically just becoming a currency that we'll probably use to buy this stuff. But that in mind, this is still a valid question. What do we want to do? Do we want to spend them now, or should we wait until the update? Now, there are two ways ArenaNet can handle this. Let's look at the facts. The reason we are changing skill points are being removed and we're moving to hero points and we're getting Ginguts instead is because skill points is an inflated currency. Tons of us, even those of us who play incredibly casually, are completely inundated with skill points spread across loads of our characters. I have thousands of them on my account. I'm sure many other people do too. And this means that ArenaNet can't really drop anything in the game that causes us to spend lots of these without it being like ridiculous amounts that would be very difficult for new players, or otherwise floods the economy with a whole bunch of other things. So they're scrapping the currency. Which means that when they introduce this new currency and when they try and replace skill points, they're probably not going to want it to be crazy inflated again. So how do they do that? There are two angles. Angle number one is that it's going to cost a lot of Ginguts to buy stuff. So right now it costs us 200 skill points for a Bloodstone Shard, right? And this at launch I'm sure seemed like a whole ton for ArenaNet, and it was supposed to be because these were for legendaries. It's supposed to be very, very challenging, very difficult. Turns out that's nothing at all, especially with champ bags, especially with all the ways we can get skill points now, and it's a one contributing reason why the Gift of Mastery is such an easy part of making a legendary. So you could say, well, after the update, maybe it will cost 1,000 Ginguts, and each Gingut is equivalent to an old skill point, and then that way it's difficult again. They could do it that way, they could increase it, and in that situation, if you believe that that's what ArenaNet are going to do, they're going to increase the cost of all these things, then you should absolutely spend your skill points now, because you would make a saving before the transition. However, the The other option for them is to leave prices roughly the same, but nerf our ability to acquire Jinguts. So it's not that stuff costs a lot, it's just that you don't get a lot of the material in the first place. And in this situation, it doesn't matter whether you spend your skill points now or wait until they are converted to Jinguts after the update or not. So the question is, which one do you think ArenaNet are more likely to do? For me, I think they're going to go with the second of those two situations. I think they're going to do that, first of all, to avoid QQ from forum warriors and complainers that feel like they're hard done by, as, let's face it, there are an awful lot of sour, negative people out there on the internet. I think they'll do it first to placate that audience, and second, I think they'll do it this way because ultimately they're going to have to go through all the loot tables, take skill points out, and put these Jinguts in, right? They're gonna, it's not just converting from existing skill points, but they said they were gonna go through all the activities and things that currently award skill points and actually put the Jinguts in. So if someone's doing the manual labor to do that anyway, then they're gonna have an opportunity right there to tweak our acquisition of them, right? You know, lower the numbers, balance things. So that's what I think they'll do, and for that reason, I think it doesn't matter whether you spend your skill points now or not. I just think it will be harder to get the Jingut currency once it comes into the game after we transition. Moving on, the next question is from Chapnick, who says, any ideas on that area in Drytop above the repair station waypoint? You know the area, covered in Monstrum, vines, and an inaccessible inner area with a chest. Did I completely miss the boat on this, or did ArenaNet never do anything with that area? Perhaps it will be a way into the new map, Thorns. I think you're absolutely right. I mentioned this a few videos ago. If you actually look and line the maps up, like for example on that Shaman's Historical Guide to Tyria, this may not be entrances to Verdant Brink, but I do think if we get a new map there in Heart of Thorns, which I'd very much expect we would, especially considering like Ratasum was moved down ever so slightly to make space for a map, I would expect, yeah, this is probably going to be the entrance to a new map. And even beyond that, I think the entrance that's very low down, that Inquesty area, towards the very end of the Drytop progression, if you will probably be an entrance to the new map very, very low down, while we've got an entrance to the new map in like one of the upper biomes, right there where you're describing. I do think this is going to be used for something, and while it may not be Verdant Brink, it'll take us somewhere. The next question is from Redust, who had a pretty interesting one, got me kind of nostalgic. Said, what's your favourite skill in the first game and in the second? This was pretty difficult to answer, so I'm going to actually add another stipulation to this. I'm just going to leave it to my mains, okay? Because there are so many, especially when you look back at the first game, so many incredible skills. Obviously, this week we've been talking a little bit about the Dragon Hunter and some of the Paragon references that maybe were there. You know, I went back into GW1, started looking at all those skills. I browsed through them. And it reminded me of tons of things like They're on Fire and It's Just a Flesh Wound and Incoming and Fallback. There's so many fun skills. Paragon was one of the 3 main classes I played back in that game. For what it's worth, I mained Mesmer and had thousands of hours on Mesmer, but I actually also played a lot of Assassin and I played a lot of Paragon, so that was really fun to look back at. I couldn't possibly go through every single class. Don't forget there was multi-classing back then as well, so I was well entrenched with many of them. However, sticking with just Mesmer skills, my very first character in this entire franchise, I can still only bring it down to like 3 answers with a bonus, okay? My 3 favorite skills for Mesmer were all vanilla skills. They weren't skills that were added with Eye of the North or Nightfall or Factions. They were prophecy skills. And they were all domination magic skills as well. One of them was empathy. Empathy was this really cool skill that thematically the idea was you hex this. Mesmers were very much to do with emotions. Many of their skills were named after emotions, and I really liked the flavor of them back in the first game. It's changed slightly now. It's much more pretty butterflies and illusions, but in the first game they had lots of skills like guilt and shame and empathy. Empathy was a very cool one that meant the enemy you were fighting felt bad about attacking you and took damage from attacking you. And this skill actually got buffed slowly throughout the course of Guild Wars 1's history, and it was just an incredibly fun skill. You know, you took it into hard mode where all enemies attacked much faster, you took it into PvP, and you dropped an empathy on someone who was trying to attack and they'd suddenly take tons of damage, and there were massive repercussions from using their attacks. The companion skill to this was for spells, and it was called Backfire. Backfire, I think I may even preferred even more than Empathy, and this meant while you had Backfire hex on you, if you dared to cast a skill, you got chunked for tons of damage. And Mesmers were kind of like the anti-monk class, and there was like this push-pull between the two of them. You know, Mesmers trying to sap monks of their energy and do damage to them through stuff like Backfire. And then the cherry on top was another skill called Wastrel's Worry, which still exists, I believe, as a trait in Guild Wars 2. And what Wastrel's Worry would do is you'd hex someone with it, and it would do nothing at all. However, in 3 seconds when it ran out, it would do tons of damage to you. How do you get rid of this? How do you avoid the damage? By using an ability. ability. So the idea was, if you didn't use any skills, then you take a huge chunk of damage from Wassel's Worry. Now combine that with Backfire and Empathy, and you suddenly, you put incredible pressure on players. In PvP, this was phenomenal. It was so fun to put people under this pressure, and it was fun to be under this pressure too. You'd be like, oh god, what do? I want to get rid of Wassel's Worry, but if I use a spell to Backfire, then that's going to do a ton of damage anyway. Well, what if I use that one spell as some hex removal? Maybe I can get rid of both of them. Is that worth it? And then there was another skill called Diversion that meant if you used an ability, it went on a massive cooldown. There were just incredible synergies. So fun. My favorite Mesmer skills. The bonus one I would mention as well is Conjure Phantasm, just a degen skill. It was an illusion skill. And that is probably my most nostalgic skill in all of Guild Wars, because it was like the first ability I was ever using, and I remember running around pre-searing Ascalon, like casting that and things, and marveling at how quickly stuff was dying. I remember the spell animation and the sound of it just so perfectly, the icon. I loved Conjure Phantasm. Anyway, that's the first game, Guild Wars 2. I've talked about this for way too long. Well, I main Ellie, it's a bit harder in GW2. I think, my favorite, like, quirky skill that does a lot of things is probably Phoenix. You know, it's applying vigor, it's cleansing conditions, it has real skill to being able to place it correctly, it has massive payoffs if you manage to get like the triple tick or even quadruple tick on people. I won't discuss ideas of getting higher because that just seems glitchy and weird. But, you know, a really, really fun skill. And also I remember a huge disappointment from GW1 when I went Mesmer / Elementalist and I tried to use Phoenix and I thought it was really boring. I was really excited by the idea of summoning a Phoenix, and in the second game you can. And I remember Elementalist was the first profession that ArenaNet revealed when we were like rolling into Guild Wars 2, and they showed those old videos of Elementalist skills, and they filled me with such excitement. And one of the skills they demoed was Phoenix. It's in like a little lake in Queensdale that I don't think even exists anymore, with a couple of windmills in the background, and they were using it on like a scale or something. They cast it, and it used to be much slower, but it had this big weighty impact. It's just incredible skill. Another really favorite skill of mine to use from my PvP times is Fire Grab. I think there is nothing more satisfying than landing a big chunky crit on a Fire Grab on someone, that noise, and then obviously they slam to the ground. And for the record, a really obscure skill that I really enjoy on Elementalist in Guild Wars 2 is Conjure Flame Axe 5. This thing is terrible, but I did go through a little while where I was like basically eviscerating people on an Elementalist trying to use the Fire Axe 5. If you manage to kill someone with that, it felt great. And maybe a special mention to Magnetic Wave as well, because I think that's a really, really interesting skill that does a lot of stuff. Anyway, that's that question. Moving on. Hopefully that gets you guys thinking about some of your favorite skills. I got a lot of reasons for mine. Moving on, we've got Gizmo Monster, who says, will you make more Mythbusters videos anytime soon? Did you run out? So, Mythbusters, I do want to continue doing. It just may come back as a different show. I haven't ran out at all over the many months, and I encourage you guys listening to me now to continue doing this as well. People still message me stuff and say, hey, this is a really cool Mythbusters thing, and a lot of the time, you guys have great suggestions. I have a huge list of really awesome things. So I do want to keep the show going, and when it comes back, it will probably still have the cheesy style about it and this crazy funk / porn music. I think that stuff's really fun. I just might rename it to Guild Wars 2 Did You Know? And one of the biggest criticisms I had of Mythbusters was, and I think these people are kind of sour to be honest, but a few people did say to me, hey, what's the point in the ones that aren't actually true? You know, I thought that added a bit of flavor, a bit of fun to it, keeps you second guessing as you're watching, but ultimately I think a lot of people were just like, if it's not true, I don't want to waste the time watching it. So I was thinking of doing something like Guild Wars 2 Did You Know, which is basically what the series is, just did you know this interesting fact, and that opens me up to do other stuff, like, did you know that you can find mowers sitting down in Brisbane Wildlands? Well, most mowers in the game don't sit down. You know, little things like that, they don't really work as myths so well, so it does open the doors, and I have a huge list. I'm just trying to decide whether it will still be Mythbusters Season 2, or we'll just sort of roll it into something slightly new. Next question is from Legendary Mithril, who says, hey, how do you do the about face plus backwards roll? Trick with the camera without the camera going all over the place. I can't use my about face button if I hold either mouse buttons. So I've talked about this most extensively on my most recent Staff Elementalist build video. I may go over it again when the specialization system drops, as I'm planning on talking about Ellie builds once again and then. But the idea to this is in your options you'll find something called Enable Free Camera, and you'll want to click that. Now when free camera is on, it means as you're currently walking around in the game, you're holding down your right mouse button to pan the camera, right? Well, with this enabled, if you hold down the left mouse button, you can actually look around without it changing where your character moves. And essentially, the entire trick here, guys, is you enable free camera. As you're running around, let's say you're on auto run, right? You're going to tap left mouse button. If these are default buttons, you're going to tap left mouse button, which will toggle on free camera. Then you hit about face, and what you'll notice your character does is he spins around and the camera doesn't move. But then he's going to start running back towards the camera because you just about faced. So what you want to do is you tap left mouse button, you hit the skill to move, then you tap your right mouse button again to gain regular control of the camera again and move along. So it's a little like 2-tap, 3-tap combo thing. You'll get used to it very quickly though. That works with any skill. Withdraw, updraft, burning retreat, sword 2 on ranger, anything that would move you backwards you can now use going forwards very comfortably, and that's the way it works. Next question isn't really a question, it's just a further up discussion on something we were talking about last week, and that was the idea of Zin. Did Zin become the leader of the Inquest? Ian and Lesbian actually came out with a really cool quote and said, Zin, after he was sentenced to be exiled from Ratasum, says this, and this was not a quote I gave you guys last week. The idea here is that this guy would end up founding the Inquest. This is the last comments he had after he'd been exiled. He says, listen up, brain for brains. You think you've won a victory against me today, but you are sorely mistaken. He's speaking to the other Syrian in the area. He says, mark my words. This sentence is a greater punishment for you, who will be deprived of my genius, than it is for me, who will be freed from your ignorance. Sounds very Inquesty, and even Hummingbird Sound followed up by saying, if you then speak to Zin afterwards, he says, now that this mess is over, I'm done here. I will go back to making plans and take my revenge on those wrinkled old monkeys of the council. So, absolutely, I'm more convinced than ever, and certainly us going to the Falls in the Maguma Jungle, and the Asuran at least, and I suppose Inquest 2 proximity to all this, we could get some story on the founding of it, and some more information about Zin. Very, very cool. And remember as well, the whole reason Zin was outcast in the first place was because of his rampaging golems, which he was tricked into doing by a mysterious villain character. So someone out there orchestrated everything that happened to Zin and the ultimate creation of the Inquest, maybe? There's a mystery there. Next question is from Scalaborn, who says, hey WP, will you ever upload a completed run of Monstrum? Kinda left us hanging. I'm going to say no on this one. Monstrum was such a pain, guys. There were so many episodes we did that were really cool, involved us getting backpacks, increasing our inventory space, making significant progress. And the thing about that game is half the joy of it is your first time discovering stuff. And so then even if we were to continue recording, we'd just be finding stuff we already knew about, but it wouldn't be really that entertaining to watch. Plus the game still scares me poopless, and it just seems poorly made, and I really don't want to do another like 40-minute recording that ends up breaking and nothing happens. We did do a little bit over on Matt's channel, but ultimately I think the series is pretty much done. We captured the essence of the game very much. This is actually one of those like mini-series we've done that I'm pretty happy to end where it was. And hey, if you really want to try it, there's always the option of buying it, I suppose. Next question is from Alfara, who says, why do you think Palawa Joko is the best evil character? I think Shiro was way better. He just seemed so epic, not to mention the trailer of Factions made him look amazing. I'm going to take back what I said last Q&A, actually. I think you're damn right. I think I made a mistake saying Palawa Joko was the very best evil character. In truth, Palawa Joko wasn't much of a villain at all, really. I mean, yes, he was set up to be a horrible guy, but the whole point of him that made him so cool was he wasn't actually our villain at the time. He was a villain, and there was this great story set up with him, but he was allied with us. He was an anti-villain. He was an anti-hero, and that was actually what was so cool about him. If you think of Nightfall, we had much bigger villains. Through most of the story, the villain isn't Abaddon, it isn't Palawa Joko, it's Varesh Ossa, and she was very kind of standard, evilish, and I don't think she trumped Shiro necessarily, but she had a lot about her and a lot of really cool story, and there were so many quirks to Nightfall's plot. You know, you finally kill her, and oh no, it's not the end. You know, suddenly you realize Abaddon is the final big game that we have to fight, and he's the big mastermind at the end. You even think about early on in the story when, you get these brief insights into Varesh Ossa, these cuts to what your enemy is doing, which Guild Wars 2 is so millions of miles away from in terms of its storytelling, and you get to see her interacting with General Morgan. Morgan was a villain as well. He was an evil guy, except he was this cool story of an evil guy that ends up turning heel and joins you, the player character. Like, that was a really cool story too. Again, we see nothing remotely like it in Guild Wars 2. Nightfall was just So good. And yes, Palawa Joker was very likable, but absolutely, I don't think he's the best villain they ever did. You're probably right. Shiro was. Shiro was very, very menacing, very intense. The storytelling in Faction still wasn't as good as it got to in Nightfall, but, I mean, yes, the CGI trailer certainly made up for that, and he has a cool story. Next question is from Jep Grin, very quick one, who says, what is your favourite day of the week? It's Thursday. I don't know why it's Thursday. Maybe because it's near the end of the week and you're kind of looking forward to Friday. Maybe it's because I always had good classes at school on Thursdays. But I really couldn't tell you. In fact, Thursdays were my busiest days while I was at college because I would be working weekends. And then after college, I'd be working on Thursdays too, which were brutal, long days. So I have no idea why, but to this day, it still remains Thursday. Next question is from Binna DJ, who says, you mentioned Ratub 10 as being Asuran ruins, but I thought the Ratasum was generally thought to have been an abandoned Masart city. Given that, wouldn't it be more likely that Ratub 10 was also a Masart outpost? Might this have some link to Heart of Thorns, do you think? A place where lore mastery might reap benefits, or has thinking regarding the link between Ratasum and the Masart moved on in recent years? Yes, Ratasum is set up over possibly Masart ruins, but Ratasum is still Asuran named. Like, that wasn't the name of the ruins, that was what the Asura named their outpost that they set up at the ruins. We don't actually know what the ruins themselves were called. And so that's why Ratub 10 is quite clearly an Asuran ruin as well. You know, it's got the pyramid structures there, and it's very Asuran. So that's the reason why it works. There is still supposedly a link between these two, and especially given the Exalted, the Masart, whatever, on the Tarnished Coast areas and in the jungle nearby. Yes, I think that there still could be that connection, but the difference is just that this Ratasum was still named by the Asura. I believe in one of the books we also hear about the idea of another Asuran city. In fact, one of the blogs, actually, wasn't it the blog that initially introduced us to the script? Talks about an old Asuran city as well underground that followed the same naming conventions. I just can't remember the name of the city itself. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's the Q&A for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions of your own, feel free to leave them below. They'll be appearing in the next episode. And as always, I've been very much enjoying reading them. Hope you've enjoyed the responses, and I'll see you tomorrow.